Vice News recently put out a hit piece on the manga industry in Japan. It's frustrating, and I need to debunk it. Welcome back to OtakuDaiKun, Dai here. So, Vice put out a very well-produced mini-documentary on Japan's anime and manga industry. Their disingenuous title investigates the, child-loving manga industry, exposing a legal loophole that allows Japanese artists to create legalized CP. It's a rather loaded piece, and I'll be breaking it down and responding to it as we go. Up front, I want to say that I do not support this video, and I don't want you guys supporting it either if you can help it. It's got enough views as it is, so instead of giving the video itself more clicks, I recommend you look it up on Sankakucomplex, which has an article breaking it down with screenshots, the very same screenshots I'll be using for my video. I've heard Vice's video has a strong amount of dislikes, and while I enjoy seeing that kind of backlash, I want to remind you that even disliking a video counts as engagement, helping to boost it in the algorithm. Their video, while it is well produced, misrepresents certain issues with a clear bias. Despite this, it's kinda hilarious that they also make themselves look like fools in the process. First off, without even talking about the arguments this documentary makes, I'm extremely pissed to see that Vice's video is monetized on YouTube. The title, for one, should immediately be a red flag. The big P word is one of those buzzwords that YouTube's AI normally latches onto, meaning that creators have to constantly watch how they phrase things, and yet here Vice is putting it in the title. Before the video even starts, it straight up warns you that it contains graphic imagery, and I can confirm that this video is explicit in showing the actual comics being criticized. Now, you may not know this unless you're a creator, but YouTube's gotten a little bit more lenient with monetization since the ad-apocalypse. Creators have the ability to disclose the severity of their content ahead of time, and if you have a proven track record of honesty, YouTube will trust you, assuming the AI doesn't catch any other red flags. It also helps list the exact guidelines between what is and isn't safe for advertisers. And let me tell you, Vice's video is not safe for advertising. You can tell Vice lied about their content here by marking their video as family-friendly, which is absolutely ludicrous. They show manga panels from works meant for adults, and while I think that's mighty bold of them, they should not be allowed to get away with monetizing it when so many independent YouTubers are struck down for far less. Seriously, my Kill la Kill lore got demonetized, and that only shows some TNA, whereas the panels in this video have drawn child sex abuse. Clearly, YouTube either supports the message of Vice's video, or they heavily prioritize content made by shill media outlets. As such, the vid will get pushed in the algorithm and rake in thousands of dollars, using more offensive content than you'll typically find on the platform. Let's put YouTube to the test then. I'll be doing a bit of self-censorship, only ever saying or showing things that Vice already put in their video, and I'll try to be even more tame than they were. If this stuff can be monetized on Vice News, then surely that same imagery should be monetizable on my channel. If I find this gets flagged, we'll have definite proof of YouTube's hypocrisy. Now, the video starts with a Western journalist touring an anime convention in Japan alongside a manga artist or mangaka. Immediately, the journalist notices a display of Kobayashi's Dragon Maid and remarks that Kana, the littlest one, is showing a lot of skin, making her personally uncomfortable. This alone is rather telling. I admit that, for the longest time, I thought it was weird to see prepubescent girls in two-piece swimsuits. I used to believe that attire was for teens and adults, and yet it is just a swimsuit. Now I realize it's one of those things where, if it bothers you, that says more about you than it does them. If you find it uncomfortable, that means you're the one choosing to look at kids in a sexual light, turning something that should be wholesome into something seedy. Why should Dragon Maid be condemned for representing something we see all the time in reality? Of course, the journalist here isn't upset just because Kana's in a bikini. It's because it's assumed that she's being put in that outfit to appear to lolicon. Certainly, doujinshi would prove that many fans do see Kana in a sexual light. It's just annoying for the journalist to focus on this when it's just a piece of official art from Kyoani that depicts the cast having fun at the beach. While erotic doujins do exist, they're not being endorsed, at least not here. There are many deliberately chosen shots of the convention center that focus on lewd anime girls of varying ages, and I don't appreciate how they're all being bundled together. Here we've got some cute ninja girls being cute, but in this shot, we've got a much older woman in her underwear. No doubt anime loves young women, but there's a clear difference to me between a post-pubescent teen with a notable chest and a girl who can be interpreted to be younger than 12. For the people who are turned on by anime children, the appeal between the youngest ninja girl here and that underwear chick are very separate. It's also a slippery slope, because even if we can argue some of those ninja girls have a lolly aesthetic and behaviors, that doesn't necessarily make them children. As we saw with Rebecca from Cyberpunk, grown women can be petite. Said women can be interpreted as lollies without being kids. I know people see this as a scapegoat, justifying their like of lollies by claiming the characters are thousand-year-old vampires, but there really is a decent point to be found there. Even if it is uncommon, what would it mean for you to fall in love with an adult who still looks like a child? Does that mean you're forbidden from finding them attractive? No! The reason we condemn diddling kids is because they're innocent and can't take full responsibility to consent to things they have yet to understand. Children are prone to being taken advantage of for their dependence and naivete, but none of that comes into play if we're talking about a fictional character whose age can be arbitrarily changed. As the mangaka Shinji points out, fiction has no victims. More accurately, he's saying that the things happening to fictional characters in anime and manga aren't happening to real people. Like, the character Han Solo may die in The Force Awakens, but that doesn't mean Harrison Ford, the actor, got shanked by his own son. When it comes to these manga, they're being made by adults for adults, without dragging in a real child. If it has voice acting, it's being done with adult VAs. If children were actually a part of the production of these works, that would be another issue entirely. As Shinji puts it, people should be allowed to enjoy themselves in their own private worlds. This is the beauty of fiction, to explore ideas that are either impossible in reality or undesired in reality. Darth Vader makes for a great, iconic villain. Fans, even kids, get really excited to see him do evil crap, but that's only because we know he's not real. If Vader were real, he'd be a horrible menace. Perhaps there are some creepy people out there who legit wish Vader would show up and start chopping up younglings, but that would stem from a lack of empathy and mental stability. Well-adjusted humans should know better, and yes, this also applies to lolly stuff. The biggest concern is that when people fap to lolly drawings, they'll be more likely to start transitioning that interest into actual children. All I can say is that if you find this girl indistinguishable from a real kid, then you're lying to yourself. All those exaggerated details, including her large eyes, scream that this is a stylized representation of the human form, not a stand-in for how we actually look. I love how Shinji adamantly states that you can't just force someone to stop enjoying fiction because it disgusts you. Just because you see it as problematic, that doesn't mean others treat it as such. Look at these two girls at the convention feeling up a cardboard cutout. They have masks on, but it's still clear to see that they're amused and having fun. And I can guarantee that fun is only possible because the girls are smart enough to discern fiction from reality. They don't think it's okay to grope people, and if they were to go around doing that to real women, that would be their own choice to ignore societal rules. I sincerely hope nobody's dumb enough to grab a chick's bust and try to get away with it by saying, "Well, it was okay for me to touch the cardboard lady, therefore I'm entitled to touch anyone's chest." Shinji also says you can't just create laws based on personal objections. You can't just make something illegal because you don't like it. There have to be solid reasons to do so, namely that someone is being directly harmed if you don't make it illegal. Not that the law is some perfect reflection of morality, but its goal is to protect people and their respective rights, which in this case is a matter of creative expression versus how this manga might influence people. The video then goes on to describe the legal loophole mentioned in the description, except it's not a loophole at all. Japan banned CP in the year 2014, but recognized that fictional depictions of children didn't count as CP. That's not a loophole, it's just a ruling. You're not sneaking CP through manga, but rather, manga just isn't considered CP at all. The video then goes on to misinform people on what rules America has regarding CP, stating that possessing lolly will land you in jail, branded as a sex offender for life. Now, there have been legal disputes over a guy possessing lolicon hentai, but only in conjunction with other legal violations he had already made. There's been back and forth about the legality of this stuff, but in the current US Code, specifically Title 18, Section 2256, while it is illegal to possess artificial lewd images of children, it specifies that said drawings need to be indistinguishable from an actual minor, meaning it has to be a realistic drawing of a real-life child. Manga doesn't fall into this because it contains drawings of fictional kids that are clearly in an unrealistic style. The journalist eventually visits Shinji in his home, where she takes a look at a book he published. This is where the true hypocrisy comes in. While I won't show all these manga panels, you can find a link to the Sankakucomplex article I mentioned earlier in the video description. You have to consent to viewing it as an adult, which just shows that Sankaku has more integrity than YouTube about this stuff. Either way, the manga shows a very young girl, likely in elementary school, getting taken advantage of by a fat, middle-aged man. Shinji clarifies there's no deeper meaning behind it. He was asked to make a child assault manga for a magazine featuring humiliated girls, though he does try and clarify that the girl he created for the manga was designed to be naughty, ultimately learning to like what happens to her, as if that's supposed to help his cause. Now, straight up, I find this manga to be disgusting and deplorable. I don't know why anyone would fap to it, and I personally feel it'd be right at home in a horror series rather than an erotic one. One person's nightmare is another's fantasy, I suppose. Still, one thing does stand out like a massive elephant in the room. Vice is showing explicit panels from this manga in their video. Certain parts are blurred out, but definitely not the anime girl's face and her horrified expressions. There's a staggering amount of detail here, and this manga is definitely more realistic than, say, Prisma Ilia. Of course, it's clearly a drawing and a fictional story, which is why Vice is able to show it. However, if this really were CP, the kind that would land you in jail, there's no way Vice could get away with that. If a real minor were being exploited, the last thing you'd want to do is share it to 600,000 people in a family-friendly section of YouTube. Not only would that land them in jail, but it would also completely undermine their noble goal of protecting kids. This means that Vice deliberately showed these images knowing they weren't harming anyone. That, or they'd rather profit off the exploitation of kids. So either they're a hypocrite or a devil. Take your pick. Shinji brings up his own justification for making loli abuse manga, one that I personally don't agree with. He likes to believe that if actual child lovers read his books, perhaps they'll get their fill and not act on their urges in reality. I admit there could be some validity to this claim, but it becomes clear later that Shinji doesn't consider himself some kind of hero for making his art. The journalist tries to counter his belief by saying that crimes against children are on the rise in Japan. In truth, we honestly lack solid, irrefutable studies on whether loli manga is deterring or increasing actual abuse crimes. This means that neither Shinji nor the journalist have a leg to stand on here, but Shinji says we should wait until proof emerges before banning anything. She asks why wait, because if it turns out there's a correlation between manga and crime, that means more and more children will have to fall victim before proof can be obtained. However, by that exact same reasoning, Shinji notes that if there is no correlation, or if he's indeed right about deterring predators with his manga, that means a premature ban would lead to more victims, or at the very least, restrict creative freedom until proof is found. Shinji's manga is then showed to a woman, Kazuna Kanajiri, who works to assist victims of child abuse. She claims the girl in the manga reminds her of children she's actually worked with. The actions depicted in the manga, the shame, the humiliation, and trauma, are all too believable, to the point where she believes said manga normalizes grooming. She says all this while admitting that there's no way to prove it. The woman then goes on to assert that if children and teens were to be exposed to this manga, it would teach them that it's normal to get intimate with adults. There's only one problem here. It's that this book is not supposed to be given to children. It's not hanging out in a Shonen Jump catalog. You have to go to specialized bookstores that ban kids just to find it. There's a smaller section of the video where the journalist even goes into one of these stores with a hidden camera, despite being told not to film. Of course they don't want you filming there. They'd have no idea where you'd post that video, meaning that it could very well be shown to kids. The irony is palpable. Desperate to force their narrative, the Vice journalist then interviews Takashi Kato, a convicted diddler who had his way with 3- and 4-year-olds for over 24 years without getting caught. This absolute vermin tries to blame his crimes on lolly manga, claiming it was his gateway. He's advocating to ban this manga to prevent more people like him from emerging. This is presented as some kind of got-ya moment, but it's honestly anything but. Takashi the Devil here is just trying to avoid taking responsibility for his own nightmarish actions. He read those books, knowing they were fiction, and ignored his duty as a law-abiding citizen to enact what he read. This is where I feel that even if we wind up finding a direct correlation between offensive fiction and actual crime, banning said fiction will always be the wrong answer. In this case alone, there are much more pressing things that should have been done. Japan's legal system has totally failed us here. Takashi Dickbag was only ever sentenced to 4 months probation for these crimes, with much of what he confessed to falling outside the statute of limitations. If I had it my way, this guy would be rotting in a cell for life, or perhaps facing something far more sinister than I could describe on YouTube. How about, instead of letting horrible criminals get the spotlight to blame their sins on manga, we make an example out of them to reinforce how brutal their actions are? It should be obvious that abusing kids is wrong, but if we let actual offenders off the hook like this, I'd argue that's way more enabling than any manga could be. Now, regarding the correlation between manga and crime, it's hard to make that claim when other parts of the world have far worse crime rates. The United States, which is often home to the very people who make hit pieces like this, has 4 times the number of sexual assaults accounting for population density. Maybe instead of policing fiction, we should be focusing on the fact that we have 199 times more gun murders than Japan. I'm not a data analyst, but I can say these stats came from Nation Master, which has a boatload of sources spanning the last 22 years. That's actually worth mentioning, since anime and manga are currently facing more censorship than ever before. If censorship or banning manga were to actually help against child abuse, you'd expect a decline with each passing year, not an increase as Vice pointed out earlier. Seriously, just look at anime and manga from the 80s and 90s. You'll find way more graphic and explicit stuff than you can these days. Urusei Yatsura is a great example. When that show originally aired on television, it showed Lum's bare chest, but the same can't be said for the modern remake. To clarify, I do love this new remake. I just want to point out how broadcasting standards have changed over the years. So yeah, if censorship actually worked, you'd think we'd see results by now. The next part of this video is my favorite. It features Minoru Ogino, a Japanese politician who is also a self-proclaimed otaku. He sat down for an interview and asked to give his take on problematic manga. He admits just what I said, that child abuse is happening regardless of whether manga gets published. He confirms there has to be a scientific basis for halting Japan's creative freedom. The journalist then asks him to read Shinji's manga and describe what's in it. Ogino bluntly points out all the nasty things the book contains, only to rule that it's just a comic book meant for adults. As such, it deserves legal protection. He's very clearly the voice of reason in all of this, but if you follow Ogino on Twitter, he exposes Vice for manipulating the footage. He claims that when he sat down for the interview, they were in a brightly lit room, and he accuses Vice of intentionally darkening the footage to make him seem grim and evil, like some kind of Yakuza boss. I find it funny, because as much as Vice wants us to hate him, this is the one section of the video I would actually show other people regarding the topic. I take it as a huge win, and want more Japanese politicians to have his viewpoint. Trying to further portray lolly manga as a menace to society, the video returns back to Shinji, as he confesses he's not proud of his work. He doesn't tell his parents about his job, nor does he think he deserves praise for the manga he creates. Personally, I think he's being a little hard on himself. At the end of the day, he's creating escapist fantasy for the entertainment of others. It can only be so admirable in the first place. His manga shows deplorable things that should never be replicated in reality, but there are artistic creators who do the same thing and receive tremendous praise. Ridley Scott made Alien, arguably the greatest horror film of all time. It features an alien ripping people to shreds after a heavily suggestive facehugger impregnates a man through his mouth. You could ask why anyone would enjoy watching such a thing, and that answer would have to acknowledge how it's a work of fiction. Nobody would want to live in that world, yet it's morbidly fascinating to see it play out. While I find Shinji's manga disgusting, I'm able to admit that it's possible to indulge in a purely fictional context. Anyone who buys it has to consent to doing so. They know it's not real, and they should also be fully aware that they can't just replicate everything they see in a frickin' comic. Their video ends with one final interview, in which Akiyoshi Saito, a psychiatric social worker, asserts that our creative freedom isn't worth it if it means children are being harmed. They try to use him as their thesis statement, which is that manga can be a Pandora's box for many people, that manga can indoctrinate people into having an interest in children. Again, however, blaming manga for a more pervasive cultural problem is just running away from the heart of the matter. Plenty of people who consume loli hentai are just as angry about child predators as the rest of us, if not more so, because they get blamed for things they didn't do. Terrible people try to justify their sickening behaviors all the time, rather than facing a proper punishment. The stigma against manga has been around since Japan's infamous otaku killer incident. Some twisted monster went on a killing spree, and because he happened to also read loli stuff, a connection was made that's condemned the genre for everyone moving forward, like some kind of otaku original sin. My stance is that, while I find loli manga like Shinji's to be unappealing and repulsive, I do recognize that people can consume it safely so long as they're responsible and emotionally stable. Furthermore, given how tons of attractive anime girls are mistakenly bundled as loli or branded as children despite appearing no different than 18-year-olds, I fear cracking down on loli will condemn all manner of anime stuff that's nowhere nearly as nefarious. Japan definitely has its own problems with perversion in society, but even the worst of it pales in comparison to what occurs in Western nations that keep trying to impose their moral sensibilities onto Japan. The fact that Vice's video is intentionally geo-blocked from Japan is a clear sign of this. They want to slander and criticize Japanese law while avoiding any backlash. Disabling comments is also a huge red flag. Instead of bans and censorship, we ought to be advocating that fiction remains fiction, while punishing anyone who fails to grasp such a simple concept. Going forward, let me know what you all think, because unlike Vice, I'm actually in favor of creative expression. So go ahead and share your ideas in the comments below. Thanks for watching!
If you enjoy this channel, help us grow by liking, commenting, sharing the video, subscribing to OtakuDaiKun, and
most of all, smashing that notification bell so you don't miss out on all of our anime discussion, lore, or Let's Play content.
You can support us directly through Patreon, Subscribestar, or our YouTube membership, all of which come with benefits like exclusive vids and early access.
As always,
celebrate your fandom!
I want to give a special shout out to all my $10 and up supporters: VideoGamer75, Steven Elak, Samuel Gersten, Otaku Mom, Jens Bauman, Mystic Samurai 1983, Lord Ormagoden, Freebrick, RNG or Shuffles 1498, Alexis Yukio Gomez Yamato, Johnny Tsunami, Link Pendrago, Brandon Baker, Observer Bellis, Flash Daniel, Matthew McAfee, Game King 352, Caitlin P, Vladimirovna, Succubus Sakura, Normace, Jonathan Padua, The Taz 96, and SF Giants Fan Mike. Thank you all so much.